Dillian Show.
I'm Jared Dillian. This is the Jared Dillian Show. If you want to call to talk about your money, please call 844-305-7800. That's 844-305-7800. This is the Jared Dillian Show. I'm going to talk about investing sort of from a conceptual level. First of all, when I started investing, I was 23 years old. And I was investing in mutual funds. Now, at the time, I had read some books, and I was getting Money Magazine from the grocery store. I don't even know if they have Money Magazine anymore. Money Magazine was basically like a trade publication for mutual funds. The mutual fund industry is a lot smaller nowadays. It was pretty exciting to be doing this. You know, the reason I started doing it was I was on a Coast Guard cutter, and we would go out to sea, and we would pull in the port somewhere. We'd pull into San Diego or something. And I had this shipmate who used to go and get a newspaper from a newspaper vending machine and bring it back to the ship, and he'd start reading the newspaper. And I'm like, what are you doing? What's up with the newspaper? And he says, I'm checking my mutual funds. And I said, what's a mutual fund? And he had some description that I didn't understand. And that really stuck with me. And I've told this guy years later, like, this is the reason that I started getting into finance. Because somebody had something that I didn't. Right? I was very jealous of this guy with his mutual funds. He felt he had to get a newspaper and check them to see how his money was doing. I didn't know what this was. I didn't know they were stocks. I didn't know they were bonds. I didn't know anything about mutual funds. So I went back home and I started buying books on mutual funds and stuff like that. And I'm like, I can actually make more money doing this than I can in a bank account. And keep in mind that back then, a bank account, you could get about 5.5%. And I said, I can make more money doing this than I can in a bank account. And so I started doing research on mutual funds. I would get Money Magazine, and, the hot thing at the time was science and technology funds. Science and technology funds. And I looked at the returns of these science and technology funds. I was like, man, these things are making like 30-40% a year. I mean, this is insane. I said, this is not sustainable. I'm going to do the opposite. So I invested in value funds, and I invested in S&P 500 index funds. And I did this, I wrote these checks. I mean, this is actually, the internet was around, but nobody was doing this on the internet. I would get my statements, and they'd come with a little stub, and I would write a check, and I would send it in. I'd send in a check for like $200 or something like that. And that was how I got started investing. So if you think about what this is conceptually, the whole investing thing is pretty weird in this country. And what is investing? What does it mean? Well, it is when you are evaluating individual businesses for their income or growth potential. But in practice, that's not really what we do in this country. We hire someone else to evaluate businesses for their income or growth potential. And when I say someone else, I'm talking about professional money management. I'm talking about a portfolio manager. Obviously, you can do this yourself, and people do this kind of amateurishly in Robinhood accounts and stuff like that. But this is why you pay professional money managers. Except they only invest in publicly traded businesses. And there's a whole world outside of that, which we'll talk about later. In fact, most of the time, we don't even hire someone else to evaluate businesses for their income or growth potential. We just hire someone to buy all businesses. That's what an index fund is. An index fund manager just buys all the stocks in the index in the correct proportion. It doesn't require any thought at all. And if you think about it, somebody who does that would be paid a lot less than somebody who is picking stocks, and generally they are. Although I can tell you that the person who runs the S&P 500 mutual fund at Vanguard probably gets paid a lot of money for reasons that are different and too complicated to get into here. but we just hire someone to buy all businesses, which is kind of weird. If you're buying all businesses, then what are you doing? Then it's a bet on all corporate earnings going higher. And if you're talking about a bet on all corporate earnings going higher, then it's a bet on economic growth. That's what you're doing. If you buy an index fund, you're betting on economic growth. So the question is, why would you bet on economic growth in a time like this? Look, I'm not one of those people whining about the stock market going higher, but it is a bit insane what's going on right now, how we are in a deep recession and the stock market is pretty close to all-time highs. So anyway, we hire someone to buy all businesses and we know nothing about it. And this is investing. This is investing in 2020. This is investing by knowing absolutely nothing about investing, which is weird. Shouldn't you know something about investing before investing? At least if you aren't investing in index funds, you have to know a little about things like growth, value, large cap, small cap, stuff like that. I'll tell you another Coast Guard story. When I was in the Coast Guard, we had this thing called PQS. And PQS stands for Personnel Qualification Standards. And if you wanted to do any job on a ship, you had to do PQS. Like I was the deck watch officer. I drove the ship, and that was a huge responsibility. I mean, I would be standing watch, driving the ship at 3 o'clock in the morning when everybody was asleep, and it was entrusted to me. In order to drive the ship, you had to know about navigation, you had to know about engineering, you had to know about radar, you had to know about anchoring, you had to know about all this stuff. You might not have ever needed all of this knowledge, but you had to learn it just in case. PQS doesn't exist in the real world. It exists nowhere else in the world. When I got to Lehman Brothers, I was faced with these trading applications, these pieces of software. And I turned to my boss, who was in the Navy, and I asked if there was any PQS for any of the trading applications. And he just laughed at me. And outside the military, you just have to figure it out. And I wasn't used to figuring it out. That's the way it is with investing. You just have to figure it out. But nobody figures it out. They just put their money in an index fund and leave it there, which is, I mean, to me, it's insane. Nobody has to know anything about investing to do investing. It's the strangest thing of all time. No training whatsoever. No knowledge about finance, about accounting, about valuation, about interest rates, about the Fed, about anything. If only there was some kind of class where we could teach people this stuff. And don't you think it's amazing we don't teach this stuff in school? And everybody says this, we should really have a finance class in school. People have been saying this for like 30 years. We should really have a finance class in school where they teach how to balance a checkbook and how to pay rent and how to pay credit card bills and how to invest and stuff like that. Doesn't exist. Still doesn't exist. And there's no, I have no idea what it is. There was actually this meme going around on Facebook. It was about, it said, it's a good thing I learned about parallelograms instead of taxes in school because it'll come in handy during parallelogram season, which I thought was pretty funny. Tax, people don't teach anything about this stuff. Why don't we do it? You don't need to take 4 years of it. You don't need to learn options pricing models, just the basics of money. Now, the thing is that I firmly believe this. I mean, I would love to teach people the basics of money, but I'm not so sure that it would make anybody any better at money. But you still need to teach it. Back to investing. You can do as much or as little as you want. And there is no PQS. Most people are self-taught. So what are you going to teach yourself? Where are you going to start? That is the tough question. Where you start? A lot of people say, I'm new to finance. I am new to finance. I am just learning. What is the first book that you recommend that I read? And that's a really tough one. And what I tell them is I started with a book called A Random Walk Down Wall Street, which is by a guy named Burton Malkiel. And he was writing about how markets were efficient and how it was impossible to beat the market. And I was hooked on that. And I was hooked because I knew that was the book that was wrong. And I wanted to spend the rest of my career proving why it was wrong. Then I read a bunch of stuff after that. I pretty much taught myself everything. Yes, I got a finance degree, but again, we are all self-taught. It is each person's responsibility to learn about money. You have to learn about money. If you don't learn about money, you are utterly lost in this world. And when your investments, when your index fund goes down, you will have no idea what the hell is going on, and you will be totally lost. All I'm asking is you go to the bookstore and you read a few books. There are some good books out there. There's a book that you should read about risk. It's called The Black Swan by a guy named Nassim Taleb. And Nassim he's a very cranky individual. He writes some great stuff, though, and part of investing is having an understanding of risk, and he does it better in this book than anyone else. A good way to read about investing is to read about gambling. If you want a book with some math in it, nothing complicated, I will suggest a book called Getting the Best of It by David Sklansky. The book is meant for gamblers, but lots of people on Wall Street have read it. Anything that gets you thinking about risk is good. You alone are responsible for your financial education. I'm Jared Dillian. This is The Jared Dillian Show.
The Jared Dillian Show.